Welcome to Fireside Mysteries, my friends. I'm Alistair Blackwood, and I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Wherever you are, curled up by a real fire, tucked in bed with the lights low, or perhaps on a long train journey of your own, pour yourself something warm, settle back, and let us step together into the elegant, dangerous world of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. A Letter from the Past. The wind that February afternoon had teeth. It rattled the windows of Hercule Poirot's immaculate flat in Whitehall Court and sent little spirals of soot fluttering down the chimney. Poirot himself sat very upright in his favorite square-backed chair, a cup of thick, sweet chocolate chaud balanced on one knee, reading the Times with the expression of a man who finds the world as usual slightly second-rate. George, his valet, entered without knocking, an unforgivable crime in any other household, but George had been with Poirot for 12 years and knew exactly how far privilege extended. "A letter, sir?" The boy said it was urgent. Poirot lowered the newspaper one precise inch and examined the envelope George laid upon the salver. It was of heavy cream-laid paper, the flap secured with crimson sealing wax impressed by the crest of a stag rampant. The handwriting on the front was impatient, hurried, yet unmistakably aristocratic. Hercule Poirot, Whitehall Court. London. Poirot turned the envelope over twice, as though it might reveal its secrets by touch alone, then slid it neatly with the silver knife kept for that purpose. The paper inside trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The ink was black, the strokes thin and spidery, the work of a hand that had begun to shake but refused to yield. Whitefriars Abbey near Lesser Compton, Wiltshire, 3rd February 1926. Monsieur Poirot, you will not remember me, though we once took tea together at Claridge's in 1919 when you were kind enough to recover Lady Blandford's pearls. I have never forgotten your promise that should I ever have need of you, I had only to ask. I have need of you now. I am going to be murdered, monsieur, and very soon, before the month is out, I should say. I am 72 years old, I am possessed of £3,000,000, and I am very much in the way of several people who love money a great deal more than they ever loved me. I have changed my will 6 times in 14 months. Each time I do, the atmosphere in this house becomes a little colder, the smiles a little thinner. Last week someone put ground glass in my Ovaltine. The week before, the brake cable on the rolls was half sawn through. My doctor swears both were accidents. My doctor is either a fool or a liar, possibly both. I have therefore decided on a test. Tonight I shall lock myself in the Chinese bedroom, the only room in the Abbey fitted with a modern Yale lock that cannot be picked from the outside. The windows are 30 feet above the ground. At 9 o'clock my maid will bring me supper. After that, no one will enter until morning. If I am found dead tomorrow, Monsieur Poirot, it will be impossible. The door will be locked, the bolt thrown from the inside, the key beneath the door on the corridor side, the windows fast, and the snow unmarked beneath them. And yet I shall be dead. Come, I beg you, bring Captain Hastings if he is in England. I have enclosed a cheque for £500 against expenses. Spend it or burn it, only come. Yours in desperation, Evelyn Marchmont, Lady Evelyn Marchmont, as once was. Poirot read the letter twice, very slowly. Then he laid it upon the small marquetry table, aligned its edges with the grain of the wood until it sat perfectly straight, and permitted himself one of his rare smiles. George, who had been waiting in absolute silence, coughed discreetly. "Shall I pack for the country, sir?" "Immediately, George. The large trunk, the fur-lined overcoat, and the new gray spats, also the revolver. One never knows." George allowed himself the ghost of a raised eyebrow. "The country, sir, is usually considered quite safe." "Mon pauvre George," murmured Poirot, rising and smoothing an invisible crease from his trousers. "The English country house is the most dangerous place on earth. There, murder is served with the pheasant and eaten with a silver fork. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, a dark blue Daimler was purring southward through the slushy streets of London, its occupant wrapped in a voluminous vicuña coat, a grey Homburg hat placed precisely upon his head. At the last minute, Captain Hastings, summoned by urgent telephone from his club, had tumbled aboard, ruddy-faced and delighted at the prospect of another adventure. "By Jove, Poirot," he cried, rubbing kid-gloved hands together, "a locked room before it even happens. You always said the perfect crime would be one announced in advance." "Précisément, Hastings, and Lady Evelyn Marchmont is a lady of spirit. She issues a challenge not only to her murderer but to Hercule Poirot himself. I accept." Snow began as they left the Great West Road, fat, lazy flakes at first, then smaller, harder, driven almost horizontally by a wind that found every crack in the Daimler's luxurious body. The chauffeur swore softly as the big car slithered on the crown of the road. Twice they stopped while he fitted chains. Night fell early, a solid indigo curtain. At 7:30 they turned between stone gate posts where a weather-beaten board read Whitefriars Abbey, private. The drive wound for nearly a mile through skeletal oaks, their branches laced with snow like the bones of giants draped in lace. At last the house appeared, a sprawling Tudor manor of mellow red brick. Mullioned windows glowing amber against the darkness, a dozen chimneys pouring white smoke into the black sky. A butler whose face had the consistency of old parchment admitted them into a vaulted hall where armor stood in serried ranks, and a log fire blazed, high enough to roast an ox. The warmth after the freezing journey was almost painful. "Lady Evelyn is expecting you, sir," the butler intoned. "She bade me bring you to her at once." They were led across a parquet floor that creaked like an old ship past a sweeping staircase where a portrait of a fierce Elizabethan in ruff and armor glared down as though displeased by modern intruders. A door at the rear of the hall opened into a small, paneled room that clearly served as her ladyship's private sanctum. Lady Evelyn Marchmont rose from a winged chair beside the fire. She was tiny, barely 5 feet in her velvet slippers, and wrapped in sables that made her appear even smaller, a bright-eyed bird drowned in fur. Her hair was snow-white, drawn back severely. Her skin parchment thin, but the black eyes that surveyed them were as sharp as a falcon's. "Monsieur Poirot," she held out a hand heavy with rings. "7 years since Claridge's, and you have not changed by a single hair of the moustache." "Madame la Comtesse," Poirot bowed over the hand with exquisite grace. "Time is more merciful to some of us than to others." A faint smile touched her mouth. "Flatterer, you will need all your Belgian charm in this house, I warn you." She waved them to seats, rang a small silver bell, and almost instantly a maid appeared with coffee and brandy on a tray. When the door closed behind the girl, Lady Evelyn leaned forward, the firelight flickering across the diamonds at her throat. "Listen carefully, both of you. I am surrounded by vultures wearing the faces of relatives and friends. My late husband, Sir Geoffrey, left everything to me on condition that if I remarried it should pass to his nephew Reginald. I did remarry 7 years ago, a man 28 years my junior." Her lips curled. "The marriage was annulled within a month on grounds that need not concern you, but the will stood. Since then I have been generous. Too generous, perhaps. Now the vultures grow impatient." She sipped brandy, the glass trembling faintly in her claw-like hand. "There are 6 people in this house tonight who profit by my death. 6. I have invited them all for the weekend so that you may observe them. Tomorrow I shall announce that I have made a new will, my 7th, leaving everything to a home for fallen women in Limehouse. I have not, of course, done any such thing, but the announcement will bring matters to a head. Hastings gave a low whistle. Poirot merely steepled his fingers. "Tomorrow night," Lady Evelyn continued, voice steady now, "I shall lock myself in the Chinese bedroom as I described in my letter. I have rehearsed the procedure twice. At 9 o'clock, Agnes brings my supper tray. I eat alone. I then lock the door with the Yale lock, shoot the old-fashioned bolt on the inside, and slide the key under the door so that it lies on the corridor carpet. After that, no living soul can enter until the door is broken down in the morning. The windows are impossible. You will see for yourself." She reached into the drawer of a small table and drew out a brass key on a length of black ribbon. "This is the only key. There is no duplicate. I had the lock fitted myself last year by Chubb of London. If I die in that room, Monsieur Poirot, it will be by murder most impossible. And you will know that one of my 6 loving companions is the cleverest criminal in England." Poirot took the key, turned it over in his small, neat hands. "Madame, you have arranged a stage most perfectly. But tell me, why do you not simply dismiss these people, change your will in favor of a charity, and live peacefully in the south of France?" The black eyes glittered. "Because, monsieur, I am 72 years old and I am tired of running away. I wish to see justice done with my own eyes and—" She smiled, a sudden wicked smile that made her look 40 years younger. "I wish to enjoy the joke." She rose, the sables falling away from a dress of deep crimson velvet. "Come, you must be famished. Dinner is at 8. Afterwards I shall present you to the vultures." As they followed her toward the door, Poirot paused. "One thing more, madam. This Chinese bedroom? May I see it now?" "Of course." She led them herself up the great staircase, along a corridor lined with ancestors, to a heavy oak door bound with iron. Inside was a room of breathtaking beauty. Black lacquer cabinets inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a vast four-poster hung with yellow silk embroidered with dragons, a lacquered screen painted with cranes in flight. A modern Yale lock gleamed incongruously upon the ancient door. Poirot walked slowly around, tapping the window frames, examining the bolt, peering up the chimney. He opened the wardrobe, nothing but furs and dressing gowns. He measured the distance from the windows to the ground with his eye. "Parfait," he murmured at last. "A room prepared for a miracle, or a crime." Lady Evelyn watched him, arms folded. "Tomorrow night, Monsieur Poirot. At 9 o'clock the curtain rises." She left them there, the door closing softly behind her. Hastings wiped his forehead. "I say, Poirot, this is a rum do. She's practically daring someone to kill her." Poirot stood in the center of the Chinese bedroom, hands clasped behind his back, eyes half closed. "Not daring, mon ami, inviting. And Hercule Poirot has never refused an invitation to a murder." Outside, the snow fell thicker than ever, wrapping Whitefriars Abbey in a white, silent shroud. Inside, the great house settled for the night, logs crackling in a dozen grates, clocks ticking toward an appointment with death. Somewhere in the darkness, a murderer smiled at the perfection of the trap that had just been laid, for both victim and detective alike. And in the Chinese bedroom, the brass key on its black ribbon lay upon the lacquered table, catching the firelight like a drop of blood. Chapter 2. The Widow Who Should Have Died. Dinner at Whitefriars Abbey was served in a paneled dining room that smelled of beeswax, old silver, and barely contained avarice. A single chandelier blazed above the long mahogany table, throwing shards of light across 6 faces that tried and failed to look innocent. Lady Evelyn sat at the head, tiny and regal in black lace, the Marchmont diamonds blazing at her throat like a challenge. To her right sat Colonel Marcus Bantry, her almost husband, bronzed, handsome, 44, with the lazy smile of a man who had never paid a bill in his life. On her left was Diana Rigby, the niece, 26, ash blonde, beautiful in the way a dagger is beautiful. Beside Diana, Dr. Felix Hawthorne, tall, stooping, gentle-eyed, the family physician who had attended 3 generations of Marchmonts and loved the present one's niece in hopeless silence. Opposite them, Reginald Marchmont, the nephew, flushed with claret and the knowledge that his latest forgery had been discovered that very afternoon. At the foot, almost invisible, sat Clarissa Vale, the companion. 42, drab, eyes permanently reddened from crying or restraint. The 6th vulture, Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, did not dine with the family but stood behind Lady Evelyn's chair, refilling glasses with the precision of a priestess performing a hated rite. Conversation was brittle. The weather was discussed with passion, the king's health with reverence, the new will with the careful omission of the word will. At 20 minutes to 9, Lady Evelyn laid down her dessert spoon. "My dears," she said pleasantly, "I have an announcement. Tomorrow morning I am driving to Salisbury to sign a new will. Everything, Whitefriars, the London house, the diamonds, the investments, will go to the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration for the rehabilitation of unfortunate women. I have decided that my money would be better spent saving souls than ruining them." 6 faces froze. A fork clattered. Somewhere a log fell in the grate with a small explosion of sparks. Colonel Bantry recovered first. "My dear Evelyn, you're joking, of course." "Do I look as though I joke, Marcus?" Her black eyes swept the table. "I have spent a lifetime being plundered. Tomorrow the plundering stops." Diana's hand flew to her throat. "Aunt, you cannot be serious. My fiancé—" "Your fiancé, my dear, is already in debtor's prison. A little honest work might do him good." Reginald tried to laugh. "Come, Aunt, you've threatened this before." "This time I mean it." Dr. Hawthorne's voice was soft. "Lady Evelyn, you are overtired. Perhaps after a night's rest—" "I shall rest very well tonight, Doctor. In the Chinese bedroom, locked, bolted, and beyond the reach of greedy fingers." She rose. The chair scraped back with a sound like a scream. "Agnes will bring my tray at 9. After that, good night." She sailed from the room without looking back. Mrs. Danvers followed, face carved from granite. At 5 minutes to 9, the little procession formed in the hall. Agnes the maid, round-faced and frightened, carried a silver tray. Clear soup, poached sole, a single peach and brandy, a glass of champagne. Lady Evelyn, now in a crimson velvet dressing gown, accepted the brass key from Mrs. Danvers and held it up so that everyone could see. "Observe," she said gaily. "One key, one lock, one bolt. One old woman who refuses to be murdered quietly." She began to climb the staircase. The household followed as though drawn by a string. At the door of the Chinese bedroom, she paused on the threshold. "Good night, my loves. Pray for my soul and your own." She entered. The door closed. Click. The Yale lock snapped shut. Then the door opened again 6 inches. A small white hand appeared, slid the brass key beneath the door so that it lay gleaming on the crimson corridor carpet. "Proof," her voice floated out, "that no one can enter after me." The door shut a second time. Inside, the heavy iron bolt shot home with a thud that echoed down the corridor like a judge's gavel. Silence. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 9. Colonel Bantry was the first to move. "Brandy," he said hoarsely. "Large one." The evening dissolved into fragments. Diana sat at the piano and played furious, disjointed jazz until her fingers bled. Reginald and the colonel disappeared into the billiard room. The repeated crack of balls continued until after 1. Dr. Hawthorne excused himself early, saying he had a confinement in the village. His Morris was heard departing over the snow at 9:30. Clarissa Vale drifted to the library fire and sat motionless, staring into the flames as though trying to read the future in the coals. Mrs. Danvers locked the doors, wound the clocks, and vanished below stairs. At 11:45, the snow stopped as suddenly as it had begun. A thin moon appeared, turning the lawns to silver. At midnight, the Chinese bedroom clock, audible throughout the house because of an antiquated speaking tube that ran to the butler's pantry, chimed 12 times, clear and sweet, then stopped. No one remarked it at the time. The house slept, or pretended to. 7:30 the following morning was iron gray and still. Agnes, carrying hot water, knocked timidly on the Chinese bedroom door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. "My lady?" Nothing. By 8 o'clock, the entire household stood shivering in the corridor. The brass key still lay where it had been slid the night before, now rimmed with a faint circle of dust. Colonel Bantry rattled the handle. Locked, he hammered with his fist. "Evelyn!" Dr. Hawthorne arrived breathless from the guest wing, listened at the door, and went very white. "Stand back," he said. 3 times the colonel and Reginald charged the door together. At the third attempt, the ancient oak gave way with a splintering crash, the Yale lock tearing from the frame. They stumbled inside. Lady Evelyn Marchmont lay on the yellow silk chaise longue beneath the window, still in her crimson dressing gown. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the painted ceiling as though surprised by what she saw there. A single neat bullet hole pierced her left temple. A thread of blood had dried like a black ribbon to her cheek. On the lacquered table beside her rested Sir Geoffrey's old Webley revolver. 1 shot fired. The windows were fastened tight, frost feathering the inside of the panes. Beneath them, 30 feet down, the snow lay smooth and untouched. The bolt on the inside of the shattered door still stood thrown. On the floor, in Lady Evelyn's own handwriting, a sheet of crested notepaper. "I can bear the greed no longer. Forgive me." Evelyn. Colonel Bantry swore under his breath. Dr. Hawthorne knelt, touched the cold wrist, and shook his head. Captain Hastings turned to his friend, face pale. "Good Lord, Poirot." She locked herself in, bolted the door, slid the key underneath. And still, someone shot her. It's impossible. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, eyes moving slowly over every detail of the beautiful, terrible room. "Impossible, Hastings?" His voice was soft, almost wondering. "Non, mon ami, merely improbable. And Hercule Poirot specializes in the improbable." He stepped inside, careful not to disturb the position of the body, and gently closed the dead woman's eyes with 2 fingers. Chapter 3. The House That Locks from the Inside. Hercule Poirot did not move quickly, he never did. Yet within 10 minutes of the door being broken down, the Chinese bedroom had become his kingdom. The local constable, a large, nervous man with snow still on his boots, was posted outside with orders to let no one pass. Colonel Bantry had been persuaded to take brandy in the library. Diana Rigby had fainted with impeccable timing and been carried off by Mrs. Danvers. Dr. Hawthorne stood at the window staring down at the unmarked snow as though it had personally betrayed him. Poirot began with the body. He bent over Lady Evelyn, his small gloved hands moving with the delicacy of a watchmaker. He lifted the edge of the crimson sleeve, examined the wrist, the fingers, the rings. He sniffed the wound, touched the thread of dried blood with a fingertip, then straightened. "Death instantaneous," he announced quietly. The bullet entered the left temple at very close range, perhaps 2 inches. The weapon was pressed almost against the skin. Observe the powder blackening. Hastings shuddered. Suicide, then? Perhaps. Poirot's tone made the word taste doubtful. He turned his attention to the Webley. It lay exactly where a right-handed person would drop it after firing into the left temple. He lifted it carefully with a silk handkerchief, sniffed the muzzle, broke it open. 5 cartridges untouched. one spent. Service revolver Mark VI standard issue, the property of Sir Geoffrey Marchmont, who took it to German East Africa in 1911 and brought it home in 1918. Curious, n'est-ce pas? Everyone in the house swore yesterday that it had been lost years ago. He laid the revolver back exactly as he had found it and crossed to the door. The shattered oak hung drunkenly on its hinges, but the bolt on the inside remained thrown, the brass gleaming. Poirot ran a finger along the bolt. Heavy, old-fashioned, requires considerable force to shoot it home. Yet it is shot. And the key... He stepped into the corridor, crouched, and examined the brass key still lying on the carpet. Observe, Hastings. The key has gathered a faint circle of dust overnight, but there is one small crescent untouched, as though something rested against it for a time. He picked the key up with the handkerchief, scrutinized the wards, then slid it into the ruined lock from the corridor side. It turned perfectly. So, he murmured, the lock functions. The bolt was thrown after the key was slid beneath the door. Already we have a little problem, no? Next, the windows. There were two tall casements looking over the east front. Poirot tried each crescent latch. Both were stiff with frost but fastened. He opened one with difficulty. A knife of icy air swept in. Below 30 feet of sheer brick fell to the snow-covered gravel path. The snow was smooth, virginal, broken only by the faint prints of birds. Impossible, Hastings said again. Poirot only smiled a small, cat-like smile. He moved to the fireplace, unlit, the lacquered screen, the wardrobe. Inside the wardrobe hung only furs and dressing gowns, but he examined the floor carefully, then the back panel. Nothing. He tapped the walls, listened to the hollow sound, shook his head. Finally, he stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind him, eyes half closed. Order and method, Hastings. First we establish what is possible, then what is impossible, and then... He opened his eyes bright as winter stars. We eliminate the impossible. He opened the door and beckoned the constable. Send them to me one by one in the morning room. Beginning with the maid, Agnes. Agnes arrived trembling, eyes red, apron twisted in her hands. Poirot's voice became gentle, almost paternal. You brought the tray last night? Yes, sir. At 5 minutes to 9, just as my lady said. She was alone? Quite alone, sir. She took the tray herself, thanked me, and closed the door. Then I heard the lock click and the bolt go. You are certain of the bolt? Oh, yes, sir. It makes a dreadful thud. The whole corridor hears it. And after that, I went straight down the back stairs to the kitchen. Cook and Mrs. Danvers were there. We sat by the range until 11. Poirot dismissed her kindly and received the others in turn. Colonel Bantry was urbane, smelling strongly of brandy, alibi, billiards with Reginald until 1, then bed. Had he ever seen the revolver? Never. Thought it lost on safari. Diana Rigby, white and furious. Alibi, in her room from 10 o'clock reading Galsworthy. No one had seen her. Motive, her aunt's threat to leave everything to fallen women had been a cruel joke, nothing more. Dr. Hawthorne, quiet, shaken. Alibi, a confinement in the village until 11:30. The snow made the roads almost impassable. Had returned, gone straight to bed. He confirmed the wound was instantaneous. Death between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Clarissa Vale wept silently throughout. Alibi, writing letters in the library until midnight, then to her room which adjoined Lady Evelyn's dressing room, separated only by a locked communicating door. Had heard nothing. Reginald Marchmont, hungover and defiant. Alibi same as the colonel, billiards, brandy, bed. Admitted forging checks. Swore he would never have harmed his aunt. She always came round in the end. Mrs. Danvers, rigid with disapproval. Alibi. Locked up at 11, sat with cook until 11:30, then to her rooms. Had served the family for 25 years. Lady Evelyn had been difficult of late. Poirot thanked them all with exquisite politeness and returned to the Chinese bedroom. He stood again in the center, revolving slowly on his patent leather heels. The revolver that was not in the house, the clock that struck midnight and stopped, the key beneath the door with its little crescent of undusted carpet, the bolt thrown from the inside after the key was already outside, and the snow 30 feet below, untouched. He looked at Hastings almost triumphantly. "You see, mon ami? Already the little gray cells begin to arrange themselves. We have not yet the whole truth, but we have the shape of the lie." Outside, the snow began again, soft and relentless, erasing the world a second time. Inside the Chinese bedroom, death waited patiently for the one man who could make it speak. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The inquest was held 2 days later in the village hall, a brief and uncomfortable affair. The coroner, a retired colonel who had known Sir Geoffrey, brought in suicide while of unsound mind with the speed of a man anxious to get home to lunch. No one in the Abbey contradicted him. The body of Lady Evelyn Marchmont was sealed in its elm coffin and laid in the ice-cold crypt beneath the private chapel. The snow continued to fall as though the sky itself wished the whole business buried. Poirot, however, had no intention of letting it rest. He moved through the house like a small, neat ghost, appearing where least expected, asking questions that seemed trivial and were anything but. On the morning after the inquest, he summoned Captain Hastings to the gun-room. "Look," he said, pointing to an empty slot in the walnut rack. "Here should hang the mate to the Webley that killed Lady Evelyn. Observe the dust, outline. Clearly the revolver has been missing for weeks, perhaps months. Someone prepared this murder with great care." Next, he led Hastings to the library safe, a modern chub set into the paneling behind a gloomy portrait of the first baronet. "Lady Evelyn opened this safe every evening to place her diamonds inside. On the night of her death, the diamonds were not in the safe. They are not in her jewel box. They have vanished as completely as the murderer." Hastings scratched his head. "Robbery, then? But the suicide note?" "Précisément. The note is the problem. It is written on paper, torn from the block on her bedside table, yet the edges are perfectly straight, as though cut with a ruler or a very sharp knife. A woman contemplating suicide does not trouble herself with neatness." They went out into the snow. Beneath the windows of the Chinese bedroom, the smooth expanse had been trampled by policemen. But Poirot walked farther along the east front until he stopped and pointed. "Here. Footprints. A woman's shoe, small, narrow heel. Lady Evelyn's fur-lined boots, I think. They come from the direction of the old laundry yard, approach to within 10 feet of the wall directly beneath the windows, and then nothing. They cease. Yet the snow is undisturbed beyond that point. One might almost believe the walker was lifted into the air." Hastings stared, baffled. "A ladder? Removed afterwards? By whom? And how, without leaving marks in the snow?" They returned indoors, where Poirot produced a small twist of red silk he had found caught on the rough stone beneath the left-hand window. From a scarf, perhaps, or a dressing-gown cord. Curious. That afternoon he discovered the stopped clock. The pretty French ormolu clock on the mantel in the Chinese bedroom had ceased at exactly 12. The hands had not merely run down. The mechanism had been deliberately halted by turning the minute hand backward against its ratchet until the spring snapped. "Why stop a clock at all?" Hastings asked. "To fix the supposed time of death," Poirot replied. "But the good doctor says death occurred between 11 and 2. Midnight is convenient, dramatic. Too convenient, perhaps." The red herrings multiplied like rabbits. Colonel Bantry was observed by the housemaid burning a packet of papers in his bedroom grate the morning after the murder. When gently questioned, he flushed crimson and spoke of private letters from a lady. The ashes were too fine to read, but the smell of burnt paper lingered for hours. Diana Rigby received a telegram at tea time that made her go deathly pale. She locked herself in her room and refused to emerge until dinner. Later, Poirot discovered the telegram had come from a London solicitor informing her that her fiancé's debts now exceeded £30,000. Clarissa Vale was discovered at 3 o'clock in the morning, wrapped in a dressing gown, searching Lady Evelyn's desk in the boudoir. When challenged, she burst into tears and said she was looking for a locket containing her mother's hair that Lady Evelyn had borrowed months before. The locket was not found. Reginald Marchmont attempted to leave for London by the morning train. Poirot sent a quiet word to the station. Reginald was brought back by the local constable, protesting loudly that he had urgent business at his club. His checkbook, discovered later in his dressing case, contained 4 counterfoils made out to cash in Lady Evelyn's handwriting, each for £1,000, each clearly forged. Even Mrs. Danvers did not escape suspicion. The housekeeper's bunch of keys included an ancient iron one that opened a disused door into the old priory ruins. Poirot found traces of snow on the flagstones inside, as though someone had entered that way during the night. Finally, there was the speaking tube. The brass mouthpiece in the Chinese bedroom had been polished bright. The dust of decades was gone. At the lower end in the butler's pantry, the corresponding mouthpiece had been similarly cleaned. Someone had ensured that sounds would carry clearly. That evening, Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room and announced almost apologetically that he required one more day before speaking to the police. The atmosphere was electric. Snow tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. After dinner, Diana played the piano again. Restless, angry Scriabin this time. Colonel Bantry and Reginald disappeared once more to the billiard room. Dr. Hawthorne excused himself early, saying he felt unwell. Clarissa Vale sat knitting something gray and endless. Mrs. Danvers moved about the room, extinguishing lamps until only the fire remained. At 11 o'clock, Poirot and Hastings retired. In their adjoining rooms, they left the lights burning and the doors ajar. At 20 minutes past 2, a scream split the silence of the house. High, terrible, unmistakably female. They ran into the corridor in dressing gowns and pajamas to find Clarissa Vale stumbling backward out of the library, her hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. On the Persian rug before the dying fire lay Dr. Felix Hawthorne. He was on his back, arms flung wide, a neat bullet hole in the center of his forehead. A Webley, twin to the one that had killed Lady Evelyn, lay inches from his outstretched hand. Against his waistcoat glittered a single Marchmont diamond pinned there like a macabre decoration. Above the mantel, the library safe stood open, empty. On the blotter, in Dr. Hawthorne's neat surgeon's hand, a single sheet. I cannot live with the guilt. Forgive me. F.H. Clarissa Vale found her voice at last. He telephoned me at midnight, said he must speak to me alone, said it was about Lady Evelyn. When I came, he put the gun to his head and... She swayed. Hastings caught her before she fell. Poirot knelt beside the body, touched the cheek, the hand still warm. He examined the wound, the position of the revolver, the diamond. Then he looked up, and for the first time since they had arrived at Whitefriars Abbey, Hercule Poirot's eyes held something very like anger. "Non," he said quietly. "This is not remorse. This is the second act of a murderer who believes Hercule Poirot can be deceived like a child." Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and silent, covering the footprints, the secrets, and the blood. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The second death turned Whitefriars Abbey into a mausoleum with the lights still on. Doors that had never been locked were now bolted. Footsteps in the corridor made everyone flinch. Inspector Japp arrived from Scotland Yard at dawn, brought by a frantic telephone call from the local chief constable. He stamped snow from his boots in the hall, took one look at the library, another at Poirot, and growled, "First a locked room suicide that isn't suicide, now a plain suicide that probably isn't. You always did pick the cheerful houses, Poirot." The two men had worked together before. The gruff inspector trusted the little Belgian more than he would ever admit. Japp's men tramped through the house, taking fingerprints, photographs, measurements. Dr. Hawthorne's body was removed on a stretcher just as the winter sun finally rose, thin and cold, over the white fields. Clarissa Vale had been given laudanum and put to bed. She lay staring at the ceiling, whispering over and over, "He shot himself in front of me. In front of me." Poirot spent the morning in the Chinese bedroom again, alone. He locked the broken door as best he could, drew the curtains, and sat on the yellow chaise where Lady Evelyn had died. For a long time he did not move. When he emerged at noon, his eyes were bright and his step almost gay. At luncheon, nobody ate. The dining room table might have been laid for ghosts. Afterwards, Poirot asked Japp for the library to himself for 1 hour. The inspector, chewing an unlit pipe, agreed. At 3 o'clock, Poirot summoned every soul still left in the house: Colonel Bantry, Diana, Reginald, Mrs. Danvers, Clarissa Vale, propped between 2 pillows and a maid, into the drawing room. The fire had been laid but not lit. The room felt like a tomb. "My friends," he began, standing with his back to the icy hearth, "we have been the victims of a very wicked and very clever mind. 2 people are dead. A fortune in diamonds has vanished. And twice we have been invited to believe in suicide. Twice we have very nearly obeyed." He held up one small hand and counted on the fingers. "First, Lady Evelyn is shot in a room locked and bolted from the inside, key beneath the door. Windows 30 feet above, untouched, snow. Suicide note beside her. Second, Dr. Hawthorne is found shot, confession on the desk, diamond pinned to his breast like a medal of guilt. One murderer, one remorseful suicide. That is the pretty picture we were meant to accept." He smiled without warmth. "Unfortunately for the murderer, Hercule Poirot does not accept pretty pictures." He began to walk slowly up and down, the way a cat walks before it springs. "Let us take the second death first, because it is simpler. Dr. Hawthorne did not shoot himself. Observe. The bullet entered the center of the forehead, yet the revolver lay beside the right hand. A right-handed man shooting himself in the center of the forehead would hold the weapon vertically. The natural fall would place it near the right shoulder, not the fingers. Moreover, the diamond was pinned, mes amis, with a small gold brooch pin through the waistcoat after death. A dying man does not pause to decorate himself." Japp grunted approval. "Further," Poirot continued, "the good doctor was struck a sharp blow to the back of the head before he was shot. The hair hides it, but the skin is broken. He was unconscious when the murderer pressed the revolver to his forehead and fired. The confession was written earlier, note the ink dry, the pressure even, and placed ready on the blotter." Clarissa Vale gave a low moan and hid her face. "So Dr. Hawthorne was murdered," Poirot said softly. "And why? Because he had discovered something the night Lady Evelyn died. Something he intended to tell Miss Vale in private. The murderer could not risk that." He paused in front of the fireplace and suddenly raised his voice. "Now we come to the impossible crime itself. I will show you exactly how Lady Evelyn was murdered in a room bolted from the inside with the key on the outside of the door." From his pocket he drew a length of strong black thread, a bent nail no longer than a matchstick, and a slim steel ruler. "Observe carefully." He crossed to the drawing-room door, solid oak, fitted with the same heavy bolt as the Chinese bedroom, and closed it. First, the key is slid beneath the door by the victim herself, exactly as Lady Evelyn did. The murderer, waiting in the corridor, now takes this thread, doubles it, passes the loop through the keyhole from the outside, and slips the loop over the knob of the bolt. With quick, neat movements, he demonstrated. The black thread glinted. Now a little tug, and the bolt slides home. The bolt shot across with a thud. The thread is still through the keyhole. The murderer now inserts this small bent nail, cut from a picture hook you will find dozens in any attic, through the keyhole and wedges it against the bolt so that his hands are free. He dropped the tiny nail through the keyhole. It vanished inside. Finally, a sharp pull on both ends of the thread. The nail is jerked free, falls inside the room. We found it under the carpet in the Chinese bedroom, by the way, and the thread is withdrawn. From the corridor, the door is now bolted from the inside, the key is on the outside, and the murderer may walk away whistling. He opened the door again and bowed slightly as though acknowledging applause that never came. Colonel Bantry found his voice first. Good God. So anyone could have done it. Anyone who knew the house possessed such thread and such nails, Poirot corrected. And anyone who had a duplicate key to the Yale lock. He produced a second brass key from his waistcoat pocket and laid it on the table. This was found this morning hidden in the hem of a curtain in the murderer's bedroom. Wax impressions were taken weeks ago when Lady Evelyn left her key on the dressing table. The duplicate was cut in Salisbury by a locksmith who thought he was doing a favor for a distressed companion. All eyes turned to Clarissa Vale. She sat very still, the laudanum flush fading from her cheeks, leaving them chalk white. "You?" whispered Diana. "You?" Clarissa looked at Poirot and something like relief softened her plain features. "Yes," she said quietly. "I killed them both." The room seemed to exhale. Poirot did not crow. His voice remained gentle. "You have carried a terrible burden for many years, mademoiselle. 15 years of being treated as less than a servant. 15 years of mending stockings, reading aloud, fetching and carrying while the money that should have been yours by right was thrown to wastrels and gamblers. When Lady Evelyn announced the charity will, the last straw fell." Clarissa's voice was steady now, almost conversational. "She laughed at me when I begged for a little security. Said I was fortunate to have a roof. That night I went to her room with the duplicate key, the revolver I had taken from the gun room weeks before, and the thread and nail I had prepared. She was sitting at her dressing table writing letters. She never even turned round. I shot her before she could scream. Then I arranged everything. The note, the stopped clock, the bolt. The footprints I made later, walking backwards in her boots to the laundry yard wall and then brushing them out behind me with a broom." She gave a small, weary smile. "The doctor guessed. He saw the mark where the thread had rubbed the keyhole. He threatened to tell unless I paid him the diamonds. I agreed to meet him in the library. When he bent to open the safe, I struck him with the poker, then shot him with the second revolver I had kept hidden. I pinned the diamond on him for melodrama. I thought it would look like remorse." She looked round the ring of shocked faces. "I am not sorry. I am only sorry I was not clever enough for Monsieur Poirot." Silence, thick and stifling, filled the room. Poirot turned to Jap. "Inspector, I think Mademoiselle Vale will come with you quietly." Clarissa rose without assistance. For the first time in 15 years, she stood straight, head high. As the handcuffs clicked, Poirot added softly, almost to himself, "The quiet ones, mes amis. Always the quiet ones." Outside, the snow had stopped. A weak sun glittered on a world washed clean. Inside, Whitefriars, Abbey Justice, cold, exact, and belated, had finally arrived. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The library at Whitefriars Abbey had never felt so small. The same room where Dr. Hawthorne had died less than 36 hours earlier now held every living soul who had been present on the night Lady Evelyn was murdered. A coal fire crackled in the grate. throwing long shadows across the books and the silent, white-faced people who sat as though posed for a photograph no one wished to take. Inspector Japp stood beside the door, solid and watchful. 2 constables waited in the corridor. Snow light, thin and cold, filtered through the tall windows and laid a film of silver over the Persian rug, still faintly marked with the chalk outline of a body. Hercule Poirot stood alone in front of the fireplace. He had removed his overcoat. The perfectly cut suit of dark gray made him seem smaller, almost fragile. Yet every eye was fixed upon him as though he were the only living thing in the room. "My friends," he began, voice quiet, almost conversational, "we have reached the moment of truth. 2 people lie dead. A fortune has trembled in the balance, and all of us, myself included, have been led by the nose through a maze of false footprints, stopped clocks, and suicide notes. It is time to leave the maze." He placed both hands behind his back and began to walk slowly, deliberately, the length of the rug. First, let us be clear what did not happen. Lady Evelyn Marchmont was not killed by a ghost who walked through walls. Dr. Hawthorne did not shoot himself in a fit of remorse. The Marchmont diamonds were never stolen. A ripple of surprise stirred the room. Poirot raised one finger. "They remain exactly where Lady Evelyn hid them the night she died, inside the hollow brass stag on the mantelpiece directly above my head. I recovered them an hour ago." He reached up and pressed the stag's antler. A narrow panel slid aside with a soft click. He drew out a chamois bag, opened the drawstring, and let the stones spill into his palm like frozen fire. Gasps echoed. 211 stones, he said, all present. The murderer never intended robbery, only the appearance of it. He returned the diamonds to the cavity and closed the panel. "Now, let us reconstruct the crime exactly as it occurred." Everything began with the challenge Lady Evelyn issued. She wished to expose greed. Instead, she handed the perfect weapon to her murderer. The locked room performance was suggested to her weeks earlier by the one person she trusted completely. Her companion, Miss Clarissa Vale. Clarissa Vale sat between Mrs. Danvers and a maid. The effects of the laudanum had worn off. Her eyes were clear, almost serene. "You, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, turning to her, "conceived a plan both simple and diabolical. You told Lady Evelyn that by locking herself in and sliding the key beneath the door, she would prove who wished her harm. You even helped her rehearse it twice so that it became familiar, reassuring. You knew she would perform it one last time if she believed it would unmask her enemies." Clarissa inclined her head, the smallest acknowledgement. "You had prepared everything. The duplicate key made from a wax impression taken while Lady Evelyn slept. The Webley revolver removed from the gun room and hidden in your own room. The black thread and bent nail discovered in the attic. Even the second revolver in case it was needed later." He paused in front of her. "On the fatal night, you waited until the house was quiet. At 20 minutes past midnight, you walked softly along the corridor, let yourself into the Chinese bedroom with the duplicate key, and found Lady Evelyn dozing on the chaise longue in her crimson dressing gown. She barely had time to open her eyes before you pressed the revolver to her temple and fired. You then arranged the scene with the care of an artist. The suicide note written earlier on paper you had stolen from her desk. The clock stopped at midnight for drama. The speaking tube cleared so the chimes would be heard throughout the house. Finally you left, locking the Yale snap lock behind you. From the corridor you passed the thread through the keyhole, slid the bolt with a tug, wedged it momentarily with the nail and whisked everything away. The door was now bolted from the inside. The key lay on the carpet exactly where Lady Evelyn herself had placed it earlier in the evening, and the illusion was perfect. Colonel Bantry stirred. "But the footprints in the snow..." Created by you the following night, mademoiselle, walking backwards in Lady Evelyn's fur boots from the laundry yard to a point beneath the window, then brushing away the returning prince with a broom tied to your waist. A theatrical touch, learned, I believe, during your brief season with the Ipswich Repertory Company before circumstances forced you into service. Clarissa's lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. Dr. Hawthorne became dangerous only afterwards, Poirot continued. He noticed the faint abrasion on the inside of the keyhole where the thread had rubbed. He taxed you with it privately. You agreed to meet him in the library to buy his silence with the diamonds. When he bent to open the safe, you struck him with the poker, rendered him unconscious, then shot him with the second revolver. You pinned one of the diamonds, taken earlier from the hiding place you yourself had suggested to Lady Evelyn, to his waistcoat, laid the revolver by his hand and placed the prepared confession on the desk. A little melodrama to convince the police that the guilty lover had taken his own life. Poirot stopped walking and faced the room. The only mistake, the tiny fatal mistake, was the diamond itself. A remorseful man fleeing justice does not pause to decorate his corpse. That single stone proclaimed the murder louder than any scream. Silence, absolute and breathless, filled the library. Clarissa Vale rose slowly to her feet. She seemed almost relieved, as though a long-carried burden had slipped from her shoulders. "You are quite correct, Monsieur Poirot," she said in a voice suddenly clear and educated. No trace of the humble companion remained. "Every word. I planned it for 2 years. I rehearsed every detail. I even persuaded her to announce the charity will so that no one would be surprised when the real will, leaving everything to me, was found later. 15 years of fetching her hot water bottles, reading aloud while she slept, being sent from the room when interesting guests arrived. It was enough." She looked around at the ring of shocked faces and laughed once, softly. "She called me poor Clarissa to my face and that dreadful woman behind my back. I was her cousin, you know, illegitimate, of course, so I did not count. But I counted the money. Every sovereign." Inspector Japp stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Clarissa held out her wrists without being asked. "I regret nothing," she said almost lightly, "except that I underestimated the little man with the ridiculous mustaches." Poirot bowed, grave and unsmiling. "Mademoiselle, the mustaches are magnificent. It is the brain behind them that is ridiculous only to the criminal." As Japp led her away, the library door closed with a soft, final click. Outside, the weak February sun strengthened a little, striking sparks from the snow. Inside, the fire settled into embers, and the house that had guarded its secrets for 400 years exhaled, as though glad at last to be rid of them. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The snow began to melt the very afternoon Clarissa Vale was taken away. It was as though the house itself, relieved of its poison, allowed the world to soften. Water dripped from the gargoyles in steady, patient tears. The long icicles that had hung like spears from the eaves shattered one by one on the terrace below. By nightfall, the drive was a river of slush, and the first car in a week, a black police Bentley, was able to reach the front door without chains. Clarissa went quietly. She wore her old gray coat and the plain felt hat she had arrived in 15 years earlier, and she carried nothing except a small Morocco leather prayer book that had once belonged to her mother. Inspector Japp offered her a rug for her knees. She refused it with a faint smile, as though the cold no longer mattered. At the gates, the press waited. 6 motorcycles and 2 newspaper vans that had been marooned in Lesser Compton since the murder. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Someone shouted a question about remorse. Clarissa did not turn her head. Poirot watched from the library window, hands clasped behind his back. "She will hang, of course," Japp said beside him, uncomfortable in his certainty. Oui, Poirot answered softly. The English law is merciful only to the rich, and Clarissa Vale has no money left to buy mercy. She knows it. She accepted the verdict the moment she confessed. Japp cleared his throat. Funny thing, she asked me to give you this. He held out a single sheet of writing paper, folded once. Poirot took it, unfolded it, and read the brief, neat lines. Monsieur Poirot, you were kind. You understood that some cages are gilded and some are merely iron, but a cage is still a cage. I am not sorry for what I did, only for the mess I made of it. Thank you for letting me keep a little dignity at the end. C.V. Poirot folded the note again and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket next to his heart. She was wrong about one thing, he murmured. The cage was iron, but she herself forged the key long ago. She simply waited until she had the courage to use it. 2 days later, the will was read in the same morning room where Lady Evelyn had once greeted them with brandy and defiance. The Salisbury solicitor, a dry stick of a man named Mr. Enderby, laid the document on the table as though it might bite him. It was brief and devastating. To Colonel Marcus Bantry, the contents of the wine cellar and £5,000 to buy the silence I never managed to purchase in life. To Diana Rigby, the London house in Curzon Street, mortgaged to the roof, and a sarcastic note hoping she and her Viscount would be very happy there. To Reginald Marchmont, 1 shilling, so that he may buy a postal order and write to someone who cares. To Dr. Hawthorne's estate, nothing. Lady Evelyn had not known he would predecease her. To Mrs. Danvers and the indoor staff, generous annuities and the right to remain in the Abbey cottages for life. To Clarissa Vale, everything else, the Abbey, the Wiltshire estates, the investments, the Marchmont diamonds. Because she alone has earned it by faithful service, and because blood, even inconvenient blood, should not be forgotten. Mr. Enderby removed his spectacles and polished them vigorously. Unfortunately, he said into the stunned silence, the principal beneficiary has been, disqualified by judicial process. The estate therefore devolves upon the residuary legatee, the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in Limehouse. Lady Evelyn added a codicil 6 months ago. She must have suspected something of the sort. Diana began to laugh, high, hysterical laughter that ended in sobbing. Colonel Bantry swore once, fluently, and reached for the decanter. Reginald simply stared at the shilling in his palm as though he had never seen money before. Mrs. Danvers stood very straight. Then the Abbey will go to the nuns, she said. Good. It will be clean again. That evening, Poirot and Hastings dined alone in the vast dining room. Silver candelabra flickered. The portraits of long-dead Marchmonts looked down with satisfaction, or perhaps relief. Hastings raised his glass. Well, old chap, another triumph. Though I confess this one leaves a rather bitter taste. Poirot twirled the stem of his own glass, watching the candlelight fracture in the hock. Bitter, yes, but just. Lady Evelyn wished to punish greed. In the end, she punished it most thoroughly. The money will now feed and clothe those whom society prefers to forget. Clarissa, in her strange way, has achieved what her cousin only pretended to want. He was silent for a moment, then added, There is a moral, mon ami. When one plays with fire to expose moths, one should remember that moths have wings, and sometimes teeth. The next morning the Daimler was brought round early. The sky had cleared to a hard porcelain blue. Rooks wheeled above the elms, shouting about spring. As they waited on the steps, Mrs. Danvers appeared with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. From the staff, sir, she said gruffly. We won't forget what you did. Poirot opened it in the car. Inside was a handsome traveling clock in a leather case, its face stopped forever at 1 minute past midnight. Hastings looked puzzled. Poirot smiled, the small, sad smile of a man who has seen too many locked rooms. A little joke, mon ami. Or perhaps a reminder. Time stops for no one, except occasionally in the presence of murder. The car crunched down the drive past the gatepost where the reporters had finally gone home. In the rear mirror, the Abbey dwindled, red brick and mullioned windows glowing in the pale February sun, until it looked almost peaceful. Hastings settled back against the leather. "Tell me one thing, Poirot. When did you first suspect Clarissa?" Poirot considered, twirling the tip of his mustache with delicate satisfaction. "From the beginning, Hastings. It is always the quiet one who sits in the corner and says nothing. The one who cries at the appropriate moments and is never noticed when she does not cry. The one whose alibi is solitude. I noticed her the very first evening when Lady Evelyn mocked her in front of us all about a torn hem. You remember? The companion's eyes. Ah, those eyes, Hastings. They did not lower in humility. They promised something. I simply waited for the promise to be kept. The Daimler reached the main road and turned north toward London. Behind them, the Abbey vanished entirely, swallowed by the bare trees and the long white fields. Poirot closed his eyes. And now, mon ami, we have earned a small vacation. A little order, a little symmetry, perhaps a new patent leather shoe tree. Even the little gray cells require repose after so much English passion." Hastings grinned. "You'll never admit it, but you rather enjoyed this one." Poirot opened one eye. "Enjoy is not the word, Hastings. One does not enjoy a tragedy, but one may perhaps admire the craftsmanship, even when it is used for evil." The car gathered speed. London lay ahead, orderly, sane, and mercifully free of locked rooms. In the quiet that followed, the traveling clock on the seat between them began to tick again, softly, steadily, as though time itself had decided to forgive the house its brief interruption and move gently forward into spring. Chapter 8. Footprints in the Snow That Vanish. The footprints appeared on the third night after Clarissa Vale's arrest, when every rational soul believed the case was closed. Poirot had already said his farewells. The Daimler stood at the front steps, engine idling, Hastings inside with the luggage. Poirot himself lingered in the hall, drawing on his gray suede gloves with the meticulous care he gave to every small ceremony. Mrs. Danvers hovered nearby, ready to close the great oak door for the last time on strangers. Then Agnes the maid came flying down the staircase, apron over her head, shrieking like a lost soul. "They're back! The footprints are back!" Poirot froze, one glove half on. "Show me," he said calmly. They all went. Mrs. Danvers, the remaining constables, even Hastings, who tumbled out of the car clutching his hat. The snow had hardened overnight into a brittle crust. The moon, almost full, poured silver over the east front. And there, directly beneath the windows of the Chinese bedroom, ran a line of prints. Small, narrow, unmistakably a woman's shoe. They began at the corner of the old laundry yard, crossed the open lawn in a perfectly straight line, and stopped, simply stopped, 10 feet from the house wall. Beyond that point, the snow was untouched, gleaming like a blank page. No ladder marks, no disturbance, no continuation upward or sideways. The prints ended as though the woman had been snatched bodily into the air. Hastings gave a low whistle. "Good Lord, it's the same as before." "Exactement the same," Poirot murmured. He knelt, brushed away a little surface frost with his handkerchief, and studied the edges. "Made within the last 2 hours. The crust has not yet refrozen inside them." Mrs. Danvers crossed herself. "It's her ladyship's ghost. She's come back because justice wasn't done proper." The constable who had been left on guard all night swore blindly that no one had passed him, that he had walked the perimeter every 30 minutes, that the only living things he had seen were a fox and an owl. Poirot stood very still, eyes half closed, breathing the cold air in deliberate little puffs that hung like white smoke. "Non," he said at last. "Not a ghost. A message." He turned to the housekeeper. "Madame Danvers, you will kindly wake every person still sleeping in this house and assemble them in the great hall in 20 minutes. Tell Inspector Japp's sergeant to telephone his chief at the inn. He must return at once." Then to Hastings, "Come, mon ami. We have one more errand before we leave Whitefriars Abbey." They followed the footprints backward to their starting point at the laundry yard gate. There Poirot crouched again. Beside the first print lay a tiny object half buried in snow. A mother-of-pearl button shaped like a daisy. Poirot picked it up between gloved finger and thumb. "From a lady's glove," he said softly, "and I think I know the lady." 25 minutes later, the entire household, such as remained, stood shivering in the great hall beneath the stern gaze of armored ancestors. Colonel Bantry in a purple dressing gown, Diana Rigby wrapped in sable, Reginald nursing a hangover and a scowl, Mrs. Danvers grim as granite, the maids clutching one another. Poirot entered last, the daisy button held up between finger and thumb like evidence in court. "Someone," he began without preamble, "has tried to persuade us that the dead do not rest. Someone wished to suggest that Clarissa Vale was innocent after all, that a supernatural agency killed Lady Evelyn. Someone walked tonight in the murdered woman's shoes, literally." He let the silence stretch until it was painful. "The prints are identical to those made the first night because they were made with the same boots. Lady Evelyn's fur-lined walking boots kept until now in Miss Vale's wardrobe. The button comes from a glove belonging to the only person in this house who ever borrowed those boots with her ladyship's permission." Every head turned toward Diana Rigby. Diana went white to the lips. "This is monstrous. I was asleep." "You were seen," Poirot interrupted gently, "by the scullery maid, leaving the boot room at 1:30. You thought the house asleep. You thought to create a sensation that would cast doubt on the confession, perhaps even force a stay of execution for your accomplice. You did not know that Clarissa Vale no longer desires saving." Diana's knees buckled. Colonel Bantry caught her elbow more from reflex than kindness. "It was her idea," Diana whispered. "All of it. She said if anything went wrong, I must make the footprints again exactly the same way so that people would believe in ghosts or secret passages. She said the English love a mystery more than they love justice." Poirot regarded her with profound sadness. "Mademoiselle, your cousin planned better than you know. She left a letter with her solicitor to be opened only in the event of her condemnation. I received a telephone message not 1 hour ago. In it she repeats her confession, absolves everyone else, and expressly forbids any attempt to reopen the case. She wishes, she says, to pay the debt in full." Diana began to cry, harsh, ugly sobs that echoed off the rafters. Reginald Marchmont spoke for the first time, voice hoarse. "So that's that, then. The money goes to the nuns, Clarissa hangs, and the rest of us slink away like whipped dogs." "Précisément," Poirot said, though perhaps with one small difference. He reached into his overcoat and drew out a long blue envelope. "Yesterday, before she was removed, Clarissa Vale signed a deed of gift. The Marchmont diamonds recovered from their hiding place are to be sold. The proceeds will establish a trust. Half will maintain this house as a convalescent home for wounded ex-servicemen. The other half creates scholarships for young women of ability but no fortune, girls who might otherwise end their days as unpaid companions." He looked round the hall at the armor, the faded banners, the faces lit by dawn coming through the high windows. Lady Evelyn wished to punish greed. Clarissa Vale has chosen in the end to reward humility. Between them, they have balanced the account. No one spoke. Somewhere a clock struck 6, clear and silver in the cold air. Poirot turned toward the door. "Come, Hastings. London awaits, and I have promised myself a dozen new handkerchiefs, white, of course, with a very small monogram." As the Daimler finally swept down the drive, Hastings glanced back once. The Abbey stood bathed in pale rose light, smoke curling peacefully from a dozen chimneys. For the first time in weeks, it looked like a house where people might live rather than merely survive. Hastings settled into the cushions. "I say, Poirot, do you ever think we'll have a simple little murder again? You know, jealous husband, blunt instrument, obvious suspect?" Poirot closed his eyes, a small smile playing beneath the magnificent mustache. "My dear Hastings, if murder were ever simple, Hercule Poirot would be out of a profession. And that, mon ami, would be the greatest tragedy of all." Behind them, the footprints in the snow had already begun to melt, edges softening, shapes dissolving. Until by noon, nothing remained but a faint, uneven dimpling quickly erased by the sun, gone as completely as the woman who had made them and the secrets she had tried, too late, to keep. Chapter 9. The Little Gray Cells. Stir. For 3 days after Clarissa Vale was taken to Holloway, Whitefriars Abbey lay under a strange, listening hush. The police had gone. The reporters had been driven off by Mrs. Danvers with a shotgun in language that would have shocked a Marine. The remaining servants moved about their duties like people walking through a dream they were afraid to wake from. Even the rooks in the elms seemed to call more softly. Poirot did not leave. He had telephoned London with polite Belgian excuses, a slight chill, the need for absolute quiet, and taken over the small estate office on the ground floor. There he sat from dawn until dusk, surrounded by ledgers, inventories, and a steadily growing pile of handwritten notes in violet ink. Meals were brought to him on a tray and removed, barely touched. Hastings, left to his own devices, shot miserably at pigeons and lost money at patience. On the 4th morning, just as the sun was burning the mist from the water meadows, Poirot appeared in the breakfast room where Hastings was attacking kippers and gloom in equal measure. "My friend," he announced, eyes glittering, "the little gray cells have completed their work. Pack your bags. We depart this afternoon, but first there is a small charade to perform. One last gathering in the library at 11 o'clock. Everyone who remains in the house must be present. No exceptions." Hastings opened his mouth, closed it again, and obeyed. By 11, the library had the air of a courtroom awaiting the verdict. Colonel Bantry stood at the window nursing a brandy. Diana Rigby, pale and hollow-eyed, sat as far from him as the room allowed. Reginald Marchmont had actually shaved and wore a black tie, whether from respect or the hope of impressing nuns with inheritances no one quite knew. Mrs. Danvers stood behind the tea tray like a battleship at anchor. The maids hovered in the doorway, Agnes openly crying. Poirot entered last, carrying nothing but a slim folder of papers. He did not sit. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began quietly, "4 days ago we believed the case concluded. Clarissa Vale confessed. The locked room was explained. Justice appeared satisfied. Yet the little gray cells, those indefatigable little cells, refused to sleep. They whispered that certain details remained untidy." He opened the folder and laid 3 objects on the table. A torn scrap of red silk, a mother-of-pearl glove button shaped like a daisy, a tiny brass key, newly cut, still bright from the locksmith's wheel. "These 3 things," he said, have troubled me." The silk caught on the stone beneath the Chinese bedroom window. The button lost in the snow when the phantom footprints were made. The key found hidden in the hem of a curtain in Clarissa Vale's room. all perfectly explained, yet all somehow too perfect. Like flowers arranged by a murderer who wishes us to admire the bouquet. He looked slowly round the room. Clarissa Vale was clever, too clever perhaps to make the mistakes she appeared to make. She left the duplicate key where it would be found. She left the thread and nail in her sewing basket. She confessed at the precise moment when suspicion was about to settle elsewhere. Why? Colonel Bantry gave a nervous laugh. Because she was guilty, man. Good God, she told us so herself. She told us. And we, flattered to be taken into the confidence of a murderess, believed her. That was the final, most audacious stroke. Poirot's voice dropped until it was barely above a whisper, yet every word carried. Clarissa Vale did not murder Lady Evelyn Marchmont. She believed she had arranged everything to take the blame, and she was prepared to die for another. She is innocent of the shot that killed her cousin, and guilty of something far more terrible: loyalty. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Poirot raised a hand. Consider the facts again. But this time without the colored spectacles the murderer placed upon our noses. The thread and nail trick is ingenious, but it requires two people in the corridor, one to pull the thread, one to retrieve the nail if it falls awkwardly. Clarissa Vale acted alone that night. Every servant confirmed she was seen retiring to her room at 10, and the communicating door to Lady Evelyn's dressing room was locked from the victim's side. The footprints that vanished were made, yes, with Lady Evelyn's boots, but by a woman taller and heavier than Clarissa. Note the depth of the impression in the crusted snow. Clarissa weighed barely 8 stone. The duplicate key found in her curtain hem was cut only last week. The locksmith in Salisbury confirmed the date, yet the murder was planned months ago. Why cut a new key when an old one would serve? And finally, the suicide note. The handwriting is perfect, but the paper was torn from a block kept in the library, not the Chinese bedroom. Someone prepared it downstairs and carried it up. He turned suddenly to Diana Rigby. Mademoiselle, you were the one person who benefited from Clarissa taking the blame. With her hanged, the estate passes to the nuns, but you believed a codicil existed naming you as alternative heir if Clarissa were convicted of crime. You forged that codicil 6 weeks ago using paper stolen from the library and practicing Lady Evelyn's signature until it was flawless. You intended to discover it after the execution. Diana had gone the color of candle wax. This is insane. I loved my aunt. You loved her money. And you hated Clarissa because she was legitimate in all but name, closer to the old lady than you ever were. You persuaded Clarissa that Lady Evelyn planned to leave everything to charity. You fed her humiliation until she agreed to create the perfect locked room illusion. Not to murder, but to frighten Lady Evelyn into changing her will back in Clarissa's favor. You told her the revolver would be loaded with blanks. Poirot's voice hardened. But you substituted a live round. When Clarissa left the room believing she had merely terrified her cousin into submission, you waited in the dressing room, entered through the communicating door with your own key, and shot Lady Evelyn while she still sat stunned on the chaise. Then you returned to the corridor, performed the thread and nail trick yourself. Clarissa had shown you how, and let the devoted companion take the blame she was so eager to shoulder. Diana sprang up, eyes wild. You can't prove— I can. Poirot produced a final sheet. A letter from Clarissa Vale, written in Holloway last night and delivered by special messenger this morning. She suspected the truth when the phantom footprints appeared again, her own plan but executed with a heavier tread. She now accuses you openly and offers to turn King's evidence in exchange for a lesser charge of conspiracy. Diana looked round the room for escape and found none. Colonel Bantry stared at her as though she were a stranger. Mrs. Danvers moved, silent and terrible, to block the door. Diana's shoulders sagged. She seemed to shrink inside the sable coat. She was going to give everything to charity, she whispered. Everything. After all I'd done. Smiling, dancing attendants, marrying that wretched viscount to please her. Clarissa didn't even want the money. She only wanted recognition. It wasn't fair. Poirot regarded her with infinite sadness. Justice, mademoiselle, is rarely fair. It is merely exact. As the constables moved forward, Diana Rigby drew herself up with a last flicker of pride. "Tell Clarissa," she said clearly, "that I hope she rots." Poirot inclined his head. "I will tell her instead that she is free to live the life she sacrificed once for love and now almost for hate. Some debts, mademoiselle, are paid in full." Outside, the sun climbed higher, striking gold from the melting snow. Inside the library, the fire settled into ash, and Whitefriars Abbey prepared at long last for an honest spring. Chapter 10. Justice in the library. The library windows were open for the first time in weeks. A mild March wind carried the smell of wet earth and early primroses across the room, pushing away the last staleness of locked doors and dying fires. Outside, the snow had vanished entirely. Only a few dirty heaps lingered in the shadows of the yew hedges. Inside, the long table had been cleared of books and laid instead with a single object. The Marchmont diamonds, sparkling in the pale sunlight like a handful of captured stars. Everyone who still mattered at Whitefriars Abbey stood or sat around that table. Clarissa Vale was there, released from Holloway only that morning, pale and thin in a plain navy costume, but standing straighter than anyone had ever seen her. Beside her, unexpectedly, stood Diana Rigby, handcuffs removed for this final ceremony, flanked by two prison wardresses, face expressionless, eyes fixed on the jewels she would never touch. Colonel Bantry, Reginald Marchmont, Mrs. Danvers, and a cluster of subdued servants completed the circle. Inspector Japp leaned against the mantelpiece, arms folded, chewing an unlit pipe with grim satisfaction. Hercule Poirot occupied the head of the table, small, immaculate, and for once, entirely serious. He lifted the necklace first, letting the stones slide through his fingers like water. "These," he said quietly, "have caused 2 deaths and nearly a third. Today they begin a different life." He laid the necklace down and took up a thick legal document. Yesterday, in the presence of Mr. Enderby and 2 Salisbury magistrates, Miss Clarissa Vale signed papers that end the Marchmont entail forever. The diamonds will be sold at Christie's next month. The proceeds, estimated at rather more than £250,000, will be divided thus: 50,000 to establish the Lady Evelyn Marchmont Convalescent Home for ex-servicemen here at the Abbey, under the management of Mrs. Danvers for as long as she wishes. 50,000 to endow scholarships in the name of Clarissa Vale for gentlewomen of good family but reduced circumstances, women who might otherwise become unpaid companions. He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Miss Vale insisted the first scholarship be awarded posthumously to the memory of Dr. Felix Hawthorne, who tried too late to do the right thing. Clarissa inclined her head, eyes bright with unshed tears. "The remainder," Poirot continued, "will be divided equally between the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in Limehouse and the Foundling Hospital in Coram Street, 2 charities Lady Evelyn pretended to favor and in the end genuinely served." He turned to Diana Rigby. "As for you, mademoiselle, you will be charged with murder and conspiracy to pervert justice. The evidence, your forged codicil, the real bullet you substituted for the blank, the communicating door key found yesterday in the hem of your traveling coat, is overwhelming. Clarissa Vale has agreed to testify. I do not think you will see freedom again." Diana lifted her chin. For a moment the old beauty flared. "I regret nothing," she said clearly. She would have thrown everything away on nuns and cripples. I only took what should have been mine. Poirot regarded her steadily. You took a life, mademoiselle. That is never yours to take. He signaled to the wardresses. They took Diana's arms. She did not struggle, only looked once at Clarissa with pure hatred before she was led away. The door closed. The room seemed to breathe out. Clarissa spoke for the first time, voice low but steady. Monsieur Poirot. I tried to buy her safety with my own neck. I thought if I confessed quickly enough they would hang me and leave her alone. I did not know she had already killed. Poirot bowed. You loved unwisely, mademoiselle, but you loved. In the end, that is what saved you. Mrs. Danvers stepped forward, eyes suspiciously bright. The Abbey will open its doors to the first patients in June, she said gruffly. We've already had 20 applications, and the village is glad. Work for builders, gardeners, nurses. You've given the old house a soul again, sir. Poirot waved the compliment away, but his eyes were not displeased. Colonel Bantry cleared his throat. I've decided to sell my commission story to the papers after all. Proceeds to the home. Least I can do. He glanced at Reginald. Coming in with me on that, old boy? Reginald managed a shamefaced grin. Rather. And I've applied for a job in Kenya. Coffee planting. Time to earn my keep for a change. Poirot turned last to Clarissa. And you, mademoiselle, what will you do with freedom? She considered, then smiled, a small, wondering smile as though freedom were a language she had forgotten how to speak. I think, she said, I should like to learn how to be ordinary. A cottage somewhere quiet, books, a cat perhaps. And every year on the anniversary I will come back here and walk through the wards just to remind myself that good can come out of evil if one insists. Poirot took her hand and bowed over it with formal Belgian grace. Then the circle is complete. The greedy have lost, the humble have inherited, and Whitefriars Abbey, which has known so much death, will know life again. He stepped back. And now, mes amis, I leave you. My little grey cells are impatient for London, for order, for a tisane properly made and a fire that does not smell of guilt. Hastings, who had been silent throughout, suddenly found his voice. I say, Poirot, you knew it wasn't Clarissa almost from the beginning, didn't you? Poirot twinkled. Let us say I knew it could not be only Clarissa. Murder on this scale requires two hearts, one to plan with love, one to kill with hate. I merely waited for hate to betray itself. Outside, the Daimler waited, engine purring. Poirot paused on the top step and looked back once at the great red brick house bathed in spring sunlight, rooks wheeling above the chimneys. Au revoir, he said softly to the Abbey and to everyone in it. Live long, live kindly, and lock your doors only against the winter. The car moved off down the drive between borders already pushing green spears of daffodil. In the rear mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller until it looked almost like a child's toy set down in a green meadow. Hastings settled back with a sigh of pure content. Funny thing, old chap. This time next year there'll be men laughing in those wards, children learning because of a murderess's repentance, and Clarissa Vale stroking a cat in some rose-covered cottage. Almost makes you believe in redemption. Poirot smoothed an invisible crease from his trousers. Almost, Hastings? Non, quite. It is the speciality of the house, not only to detect evil but to allow good sometimes to have the last word. He closed his eyes, well satisfied. Behind them, Whitefriars Abbey settled into its new life. Doors flung wide, windows shining, the scent of primroses drifting through rooms that had known only fear for far too long. And high above the library mantel, the brass stag, now empty of its glittering burden, caught the sunlight and flashed it back across the lawns like a